Josh Frydenberg, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be with you, Chris.
Look, this Australian Energy Market Operator report into the load shedding in South Australia, it shows very clearly that the main problem here was that wind generation dropped sharply and they couldn't ramp up the gas generation quickly enough.
It absolutely shows the difficulty the Australian Energy Market Operator has in managing the grid with so much intermittent sources of power, namely wind and solar, where the predictability of supply is so difficult. You see, wind power fell to just providing 3% of South Australia's energy needs just preceding that crisis. Last year at times it was providing 80% of South Australia's needs, and that 3% was a 90% drop from what wind was providing earlier in the day in South Australia. That makes the job of the energy market operator very, very difficult.
Well, we can see from the graphs, though, that as wind drops, that's the green part of the graph, and the purple part, the gas ramps up quickly. I suppose people wonder why you can't get more gas generation into the market, why that couldn't be fired up sooner, why there isn't more there. But I suppose the answer is that a lot of that's been priced out over time by the renewable subsidies.
Well, the reality is the increased renewables in South Australia has one of the highest uptake of renewables on a per capita basis anywhere in the world. More than 41% of their power coming from wind and solar. It does push out coal and it does push out gas. So not only has gas found it difficult to survive in South Australia, but coal has become extinct because the Northern Power Station closed last May. That had more than 500 megawatts of power, which is 5 times the amount of power that was the subject of the load shedding in South Australia last Wednesday. If that Northern Power Station was on, then none of those blackouts would have occurred. That's the reality of the situation in South Australia. Now, at the time, Alinta, which is the owner of the Northern Power Station, said that one of the reasons for its closure was the high uptake of renewables in South Australia. This has been denied as a cause by Mark Butler and the Labor Party. It's about time they realised that pushing coal out of their state was a bad idea, and it would have meant a more stable system.
Yeah, so you're saying that South Australia would have been okay with that coal-fired power still in the system, but of course it was driven out by your policies. It was driven out by renewable energy that is subsidised under the existing renewable energy target. Doesn't that demonstrate that your existing policies are contributing to energy unreliability and cost blowouts across the country, particularly in South Australia?
Well, Chris, the responsibility lies here with the South Australian government. Jay Weatherill, as you know, went to Paris and said he was conducting a big experiment in South Australia. I'm not sure that South Australian businesses and households, pensioners and single mothers wanted to be in the laboratory when Jay Weatherill was conducting this big experiment, because that experiment has failed. No one told him that he should have more than 40% of his power being generated by intermittent sources of power. He should have planned for that. He should have realised that the supply of wind and solar is not like the supply of gas or coal or hydropower. It's actually very unpredictable, and you need to have backup power which South Australia currently does not have. There's also the added complication of what are called the frequency control and ancillary services, the level of inertia that you get from spinning turbines from baseload power, namely coal and gas and hydro, that you don't get from wind and solar. That's one of the issues that will be looked into by the Finkel review into energy security.
Well, Victoria and Queensland, the Labor governments there are both promising these state-based renewable energy targets, but the big breaking news tonight now is that Western Australian Labor, in the middle of their election campaign, have backed away from it. Just over a week ago on this program, we shared the exclusive story in The Australian that revealed the Western Australian Labor spokesperson had promised a 50% renewable energy target in the election campaign. Mark McGowan today has completely repudiated that. Have a listen.
There will be no renewable energy target at a state level under any government I lead. We will not be putting in place a target under a WA Labor government.
Josh Frydenberg, as the federal minister, that must gladden your heart if the states are going to back away from these individual targets, which you say are exacerbating the situation.
Well, how can anyone believe Mark McGowan? He's just repeated words not too dissimilar to Julia Gillard on the eve of the election about the carbon tax.
Well, perhaps we could believe him, though, because he's seen that it would be absolute madness to go down that path.
But Julia Gillard said there'd be no carbon tax under a government she led, and as we know, that didn't turn out to be the case. So I think in Western Australia, if you're a voter there, you know what's coming with the Western Australian Labor government and you don't want to risk it. In Victoria, Daniel Andrews has given his public a 40% renewable energy target, and the madness in Queensland, where they only get 4.5% of their power from renewable sources today, are going to get 50% renewable energy. And the Palaszczuk government put out a report saying, remarkably, this wouldn't lead to the closure of any coal-fired power stations. Well, the Grattan Institute called that magic pudding economics. No one believes it. At the end of the day, these Labor states, Bill Shorten and the Labor Party federally, are practising the politics of ideology rather than thinking about the blue-collar jobs and the pressure that household budgets are under.
Well, Bill Shorten is sticking with his 50% renewable target by 2030. We have seen Bloomberg New Energy Finance put out that estimate of $48 billion of investment to deliver that target. There's no question, is there, that that $48 billion is additional expenditure, because being intermittent, all of this energy needs to be backed up by some form of baseload power. So the $48 billion is the cost, the minimal cost, I would suggest, given other estimates, of reaching that target.
I mean, isn't it hilarious to see Mark Butler and Tanya Plibersek and now Anne Ali go out and say this is a $48 billion, quote, investment, not being a cost. You only spend money in this game to make money. And ultimately, that so-called investment needs to be recouped, and it will only be recouped from household budgets and businesses. So it is going to be a massive impost on the system, and there's no denying it. I thought it was also quite amusing to see Bill Shorten trying to jump any which way this morning in his interview on radio, but not answering the question as to how much his 50% renewable energy target will really cost.
Well, what about your policy then? What about Josh Frydenberg, what about the cost of your policy? Under your current target, the estimates are that that will require another $9 to $10 billion of investment in large-scale renewable over the next 3 years. All of that investment, of course, is subsidised. All of this acts as a disincentive for coal and gas in the system. Isn't it time to cap or scrap your existing renewable energy target where it stands today?
Well, unlike the Labor Party, we haven't ducked and weaved this question. We've actually been quite upfront. I've said on your program and numerous programs that the RET as it stands, the 23.5 by 2020, will actually lead to a cost of $63 on the average household electricity bill. We're upfront about that. But Bill Shorten has a $48 billion impost that he's running away from. And Chris Bowen, in one of the most embarrassing interviews you would have ever seen on David Spears earlier today, didn't even know the detail of his own policy, and then said, oh, but our 50% renewable energy target won't drive up electricity prices.
But on your policy, there's no change? No change before the next election to your renewable energy target?
We have no plans to change our target.
All right, thanks for joining us, Josh Frydenberg.
Great to be with you.